Let's talk generics. When it comes down to it, whether or not you buy generic really just comes down to personal preference. But before you can know what to decide, let's tell you a little bit about what generic actually is. Kapow! More education. Historically and technically speaking, the term generic means a product that doesn't have a brand. So instead of buying that bottle of Sam Adams, you would buy a bottle that literally just said the word beer on it. And with that generic product, usually the labeling was extremely simple. It was either black and white or maybe had one color in it. It just said what the product was and maybe had a picture of what the product was. That's it. In practice though, at least in recent history, generic just means a brand that isn't mass marketed and is usually sold at a lower price. Some other terms that are often associated with the word generic are white label, private label, and store brand. Let's talk about what those are. White label is something that a manufacturer does where they create a product and sell it to retailers and tell those retailers, you can put whatever brand you want on this. We don't care. And it gets the name because it used to literally be a white label that the retailer would then put their own branding on top of. A good way to remember this is white label, white sugar. Because you could go to a store, you could go to Target, you could go to Walmart, you could go to Trader Joe's and buy sugar, and there's a chance that all of that sugar came from the same manufacturer and that these guys just put their own branding on it. Private label is when a manufacturer makes a product with the intention of another specific retailer selling it. Now, with the example of Trader Joe's, they are a massive private label seller. Their store is over 80% private label stuff. So one example of something that they sell is some of their pre-made food. Now, when you buy it, it's gonna have their own Trader Joe's or some similar name on it, but that's something that they didn't make themselves usually. They went to a manufacturer and said, hey, will you make this for us? And it's also possible that that manufacturer already had an existing product that was either the same or very similar to that product. So a good example of this is, let's say, some of the snack food Trader Joe's sells. They have these cool trail mixes that they sell, right? Well, they go to a company that already makes trail mix and they say, hey, can you make a trail mix for us? And sometimes, whether it be trail mix or rice cakes or something else, sometimes they'll just use the same exact formulation that these manufacturers are using in some of the brand name products they're selling. And other times they will make some specific customizations specific to Trader Joe's. It can vary. Some people claim that private label implies that it's an exclusive product, but it varies a lot on industry and not everyone agrees that. Store brand means any good that is sold by the store with either their brand name on it or a brand name that's exclusive to them on it. So for example, if you go into Kroger and you buy some cheese that's labeled Kroger cheese, that's an example of a store brand. Now, a lot of stores will use other brand names. So for example, Walmart sells a lot of things under the Great Value brand, and Costco sells a lot under the Kirkland's Best brand. Those are both store brands as well. The big thing with those is you're not gonna go to Target and see some of Great Value goods because that's sold exclusively by Walmart. So a store brand could be manufactured by the grocery store itself, or it could be private label or white label. So for all our purposes, we'll refer to all of these things, white label, store brand, and private label. We'll refer to all three of those as generic. Phew, that was probably a lot more than you wanted to know about generic products, but now you probably know more than your neighbor or your brother or your sister or your mother. So the important thing to know with generics is that just because it's a generic does not mean it is lower quality or it doesn't taste as good. In my opinion, the best way to know is to try a generic for each product at least once. And if you find that it's not as good quality or doesn't have the taste that you like, then that's fine. Just mark that one off and know you'll get the store brand for that one. It's also worth mentioning that the generic is going to be different at different stores. So maybe you don't like Kroger's version of ranch, but maybe you really like Tom Thum's version of ranch. You get the point. When my wife was growing up, they went through a period where they did a test of all of the stuff they got from the grocery store. And they just started getting generic after generic after generic. And they found out that they actually liked some of the generic products even better than the brand names. Oh, and it's worth mentioning that some of the generic products are actually the same exact product as those brand name ones. If you don't believe me, go online and search Trader Joe's products. You will find that a lot of people compare the big brand names product to the Trader Joe's products and think that they're exactly the same, down to the ingredient. Well, before you go out and just buy one of every single generic, which is a perfectly fine approach, let me give you a couple pieces of advice that can help you decide what things may be better to buy generic and what may be better to buy brand name. So the first thing to think about is if something doesn't require very much processing or there's not much differentiation among different products, it is ripe for the picking to get a generic. Some examples of this are things like sugar and flour and unprocessed nuts, because what can that brand name do that's really going to make it that much different? On the flip side, the more flavorful and the more nuanced the product is, the more likely you may want to go with the brand name. For example, Häagen-Dazs and Ben & Jerry's ice cream is probably going to blow generic ice cream out of the water most of the time. And lastly, anything that you're going to use in a recipe where it's not the star ingredient, it's probably okay to be generic. If you're eating a pan of brownies, you probably don't know if that butter inside of there is $50 butter or 50-cent butter. You just can't tell. And for fun, here's a chart that NPR made where they studied a bunch of professional chefs and saw what they were more likely to buy generic more so than the general public. So anything that's on the right side is something that the chef was more likely to buy generic than the general public would. That's it for generics. Let's start tackling produce.